Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's Western EIM Governing Body meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and if you have any technical difficulties, please send a chat to the event producer. Please note that all lines will be muted until the public comment portions of the call, and we will provide instructions on how to enter the queue at that time. And just a friendly reminder that this call is being recorded. With that, I'd like to turn the call over to Roger Colleton. Roger, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, governing body. Let me go ahead and start out with taking the roll call, and I will turn it over to you, Chair Prescott. So we'll start with you, Chair Prescott.
Here.
Vice Chair Decker.
Here.
Val Fong.
Here.
Rob Konzioka.
Here.
And Carl Linville.
Here.
Thank you, governing body. We are all present and accounted for. We have a quorum, and we may proceed. Back to you, Chair Prescott.
Okay, thanks, Roger, and welcome, everybody. First up on our agenda is public comment. So this would be comment from the public for items not on the agenda today. So, Adam, would you check to see if there's anybody waiting to make a public comment?
No problem. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to make a public comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted, and at that time, please then just state your name and comment. And once again, that is #2 if you wish to make a comment. All right, I'm not seeing any comments in the queue at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on, I throw it back to you, Roger, for a general session meeting minutes.
Great. So I need a motion to approve the December 2nd, 2020 general session minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved. This is Val. Oh, Anita, you can have it.
So, all right, so we'll have Anita with the motion, and who seconds?
I'll second. This is Val.
Okay, second. Excellent. Thank you. And I will go ahead and I will take the vote in the order as I did the roll call. So, Chair Prescott, your vote?
Yes.
Anita Decker?
Aye.
Val?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Carl?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a passed motion. Back to you, Chair Prescott.
Okay, thanks again, Roger, for all your help. Okay, next up on the agenda is the EIM Governance Review Committee update being presented by the chair of that committee, Therese Hampton, if we can get her on the line.
All right, I do see her on the line, and I'm going to unmute her now.
Good afternoon, members of the Governing Body Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update on the Governance Review Committee's work. We issued a revised draft proposal on December 14th, right before people moved into a holiday break. We had initially asked for comments by the end of this week, Friday, January 22nd, but we extended comments to Friday, January 29th, in recognition of both the holiday break, but also the really important work that kind of launched at the beginning of this month on summer readiness. And we've always tried to be a bit mindful of our comment process and the impact to stakeholders relative to other comment processes. And so we will think about that as we look forward, both in terms of response to comments and next steps for the Governance Review Committee. We want to just be mindful that if giving stakeholders the opportunity to prioritize and kind of balance the workload. So we're looking for a close of comment, and then we will take those comments and determine next steps, and we're happy to report back to you once we kind of have a sense for the next steps for the Governance Review Committee. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Therese. Any questions from the governing body? Okay, hearing nothing. Thanks for your report, Therese.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Body of State Regulators update from Commissioner Tawney from the Oregon PUC, if we can get her on the line.
Her line should be unmuted now.
Good afternoon, Chair Prescott and governing body members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide another Boxer update. For the record, my name is Lisa Tani, and I currently serve as a commissioner on the Oregon Public Utility Commission and as the Boxer chair. Since the Boxer's last update on November 4th of last year, we've all been very busy, you as well as us. As you probably already know, Kara Fornstrom, Chair Fornstrom of Wyoming, was the Boxer vice chair, and she's resigned from her position at the Wyoming Public Service Commission. Her last day was on Friday, January 15th, and we just want to really appreciate Kara's hard work. She was a very engaged and committed member of the Boxer, and her contributions to our work are very much appreciated. Commissioner Rafer, the Boxer's representative on the GRC, Chair Williamson, the Boxer's representative on the governing body nominating committee, and I will all miss Kara on the leadership team. We all wish her very well in her new endeavor. The Boxer will be working towards filling the vice chair position in the upcoming weeks. On turning to the EIM governance review, the Boxer is currently in the process of developing consensus comments in response to the report we just heard on the straw proposal that was, or the revised proposal that was released in late December. We discussed the revised proposal and directions for our comments in our open session on January 8th. We very much appreciate the additional week to pull those comments together, and we expect to file them on the 29th. I'd really like to commend the GRC on their commitment to this process, which is, I think, very much reflected in the quality of the revised proposal. Many of the recommendations in the revised proposal are largely consistent with the Boxer's views. I wanted to comment very briefly on two of those issues that came up quite centrally in our January 8th meeting. On joint authority, consistent with the Boxer's historical position, we strongly support the GRC's recommendation for joint authority between the EIM governing body and the CAISO board over all the proposed changes to the real-time market design and all aspects of the EDM initiative with limited exceptions. Joint authority, from our view, is a cornerstone of the GRC's proposal, and movement to a more equitable and transparent shared authority model is really an essential step in building trust and paving the way for continued market expansion through CAISO market options. Though specific concerns were raised about joint authority as proposed in the draft SAW proposal earlier, the revised proposal offers very well-reasoned and balanced proposals to address the concerns that were raised while preserving that fundamental joint authority model. And the Boxer really clearly understands that participation in the CAISO wholesale energy markets is not voluntary for many California entities, as it is for EIM entities, and that this poses different risks. However, as we were reminded this summer during the heat storm, we are all interconnected and interdependent. So making decisions together best serves overall market stability and customers throughout the West. The Boxer strongly believes that the joint authority model is a substantial improvement over the current classification process applied.
I apologize to interrupt you. It appears we're dealing with some technical difficulties, and we've been disconnected from the general session. So give me a moment while we try to resolve this.
Thank you.
I apologize for that.
No, not at all.
All right, and we should be live again.
Okay, Commissioner Tawny, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And Val pointed out, she's so good at this, that the last thing you said to us was joint authority is the cornerstone. And then it's
oh, excellent. All right. I appreciate that, Member Fong. Thanks so much for your patience. I don't know quite what happened. The operator just came on and said that I'd been disconnected. So, yes, so joint authority is the cornerstone of the GRC's proposal. We, as the BOSSer, and in our conversation in our open meeting, really reflected that movement towards a more equitable and transparent shared authority model is really an essential step in building trust and paving the way for continued market expansion. Though there were specific concerns raised about joint authority as proposed in the draft straw proposal, we really saw reflected in the revised proposal offers that are well-reasoned, balanced, and really seek to address concerns raised while preserving that fundamental joint authority model. The BOSSer understands that the participation in the CAISO wholesale energy markets is not voluntary for many California entities in the way that it is for EIM entities, and that this creates different risks. But we'll, as we were really reminded during this summer's heat storm, we are all interconnected and interdependent, and making decisions together really best serves overall market stability and customers throughout the West. So in our comments on the 29th, I expect the BOSSer will strongly endorse the joint authority model as a substantial improvement over the current classification process. On BOSSer funding, I am so pleased to provide good news. Stakeholders are largely in alignment that there would be an overall benefit to the long-term stability of the market associated with the active engagement by the BOSSer in policy initiatives, and thus for providing financial support to the BOSSer to staff us to be able to do that. Accordingly, the GRC in the current proposal supports BOSSer funding and encourage the BOSSer's discussions with state-regulated EIM market participants, the SRMPs, and other stakeholders. So through an open and thorough process guided by comments from the GRC stakeholder process and running concurrently with their work, the BOSSer has reached an agreement on funding through an outside-of-the-market approach with the SRMPs. With funding provided by those utilities, the Western Interstate Energy Board will provide independent technical expertise, staff resources, and the office space necessary to assist the BOSSR in our efforts to achieve and maintain a better understanding of the Western EIM, to draft comments and provide advice on the market design and policy. And I want to emphasize that that support will be independent and really accountable to the BOSSR. This isn't, of course, that the BOSSR is checking its comments positions with the WEAB board, but that WEAB is providing a structure for us so that we can be as cost-effective and efficient as possible. But the BOSSR staff will be working for the BOSSR. And I'm pleased to announce that since our last update, the BOSSR and WEAB boards have both voted to support the arrangement and the formal documents necessary to implement it. And we're in the very final stages of confirming language in the standard contract with the SRMPs. You can imagine that many legal team reviews and that many utilities takes a little bit, but we're working our way through it, and it's looking very positive. They met yesterday, and we expect we are through the substantive issues and are down to the I's and commas. I think this is just a tremendous success story for the GRC and for regional cooperation. The governance review process has provided an ideal forum for broad stakeholder engagement on this really critical issue, and the GRC, I think, did an excellent job of guiding and encouraging participation that built back towards that consensus on this key issue. Turning very quickly to the EIM market initiatives, I want to recognize the transition that the CAISO's announced are given the complexity of the summer readiness issues. And BOSSR continues to monitor and evaluate market initiatives that have really a sufficient nexus to the EIM. Given the recently launched market enhancements for summer of 2021, there are several recommendations that are coming to the fore, and we anticipate, as I know you do, a package of proposals that will go through the governing bodies quite quickly this spring. Nimbly addressing those issues identified in the root cause analysis is critical, not just for the CAISO, but for all the VAs across the West. Scarcity and reliability events do not respect VA boundaries, and we are all invested in effective solutions. I think, from my perspective, this is a case where modeling joint decision-making by both bodies is critical to building trust in the market, both within California and outside it, for the issues here that have a nexus to the EIM. And I would respectfully suggest that it's an opportunity for you to lean in and demonstrate that functionally joint authority allows for nimble, healthier market corrections that are durable and engender trust and benefit the whole market footprint. And allow us to ensure that there's a real dialogue across the region on the issues that impact and have a nexus to the EIM. And so I look forward to your work with the CAISO Board of Governors throughout this very expedited schedule. It's only, of course, in the initial workshop and scoping stage, and the 7 topics that are proposed have 3 additional items for consideration. Not all of that work, of course, will fall in the BOSSR's purview. The BOSSR will focus its attention on the proposed changes to rules and policies that really have that nexus to the EIM specifically. So, for example, the near-term limited modifications around EIM coordination and resource efficiency tests. In the longer term, we'll continue to also follow EDAM and DAME and other EIM initiatives as the CAISO re-engages them. But we look forward to really paying close attention to the summer readiness effort. And finally, we're really preparing to engage with the governing body nomination process. As we know, there are terms that expire in June. And Haley Williamson, the chair of the Nevada Public Utilities Commission, on that committee will fully engage, and at the appropriate time will bring us together as the BOSSer to review the process and work together with her to provide feedback on the candidates. So in closing, our next BOSSer meeting is February 12th. It'll be an open meeting, and we'll post the agenda on the BOSSer webpage closer to that date. And I stand ready for any questions if you have them, and thank you for your patience with the technology.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Tani. I really appreciate that report. And a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, I'd like to add my thanks and congratulations to Commissioner Fornstrom and all she did to help us while she was on the BOSSer. And also, I guess congratulations on all the work for getting the support from WEAVE. That was quite an effort, and I'm glad you did it. I think it's going to benefit all of us. So congratulations on making that happen, or at least taking it to the step where it is going to happen. And then I will at this point turn and see if there's any questions from other governing body members for Commissioner Tani.
John,
I've got one.
Oh, okay. Rob, go ahead, and then Anita.
Okay. Thank you, John. Commissioner Tani, I would like to add my congratulations as well on being able to get the funding agreement in place to where you're on that cusp of having everything completed. And I would just like to also extend a thank you to all those who supported that. These types of things are never easy to do, and I know they are not only a challenge, but tend to provide that opportunity for friction on where you draw these lines. And I think it's a good testament that you've been able to get there with the groups and bring this to the finish line. So thank you to you personally, and then to the entities who are providing that funding.
Anita, go ahead.
Okay, Commissioner Tani, thank you for your report, and I am really gratified to see the progress that you guys have made in regard to the funding, and then also the support of the joint authority model. A question I have is, you guys look at the agenda of the BOSSer going forward. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the Berkeley and Western Interstate Boards report on the implications of resource adequacy and providing similar capacity credits through each state, because there are differences from state to state. So I'm hoping that that's something you guys might give some attention to over this next year as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the appreciation, and I agree that we should recognize the hard work on the utility side as well to get to where we are with the BOSSer. And Member Decker, that's an interesting, it's an interesting issue, and certainly one that keeps coming forward. I think we will continue to grapple with issues where there's a nexus with the EIM, but I think we'll also continue to engage closely with YRAB around some of those reliability issues. Of course, Commissioner Raper, while working incredibly hard on the GRC, has stepped in also as the chair of the Western Interstate Reliability something body, YRAB. I'm going to miss the acronym. When Chair Fornstrom, thank you. When Chair Fornstrom stepped down, Kara's departure created quite the hole, and so I think those conversations will continue because the line is always fuzzy, and what you're doing several months out quickly becomes what you're doing in real time, and so we'll just keep that dialogue open. I think on our agenda is a lot of learning so that we can be ready and can really move along with the summer readiness program quickly through the next couple of months. And that learning will equip us, I think, for that larger conversation as well to support YRAB as they engage.
Thank you.
Val?
Thank you, Chair Prescott. I'd like to say that John said it very well up front in congratulating Carla Fornstrom on her next opportunity, and then also on the work that has been done between BOSSR and the state-regulated market participants. I just wanted to say that the issues that we're dealing with, I mean, even those that we're dealing with in the upcoming summer, these are very important issues, in particular for the EIM in my mind. And so I'm very glad that we are having the technical expertise and the need for it on the BOSSR be recognized by certainly all the regulated entities, and they're really putting their money where their mouths are in giving that support. So really grateful for the hard work on all parts. And I do enjoy Chris being on the Governance Review Committee very much.
Thank you, Member Fong. I appreciate that.
Any other questions for Commissioner Tawney? Okay, well, don't go away, Commissioner, because I have a couple of other comments for you. And you've already covered most of them, but it's dealing with an agenda item we have coming up, agenda item number 6 today, where we're going to have a governing body discussion about the EIM performance during those extreme conditions this summer. And I just wanted to make sure, and you've already indicated that BOSSR is engaged in that process, and as an independent entity, BOSSR can decide at what level. But I want to definitely reach out on behalf of the governing body and let you know that please inform us, the governing body, if BOSSR has any concerns out there that are not being addressed, as you see, should be addressed in that initiative, the market enhancements for summer of 2021. We just want to make sure that if there's any lingering concerns out there, to get to the table, there is a forum to do that. But if for some reason they're not being addressed, I would really appreciate the BOSSR reaching out to us so we can help.
Thank you so much, Chair Prescott. I appreciate that open invitation and will relay it absolutely to the BOSSR. I think as we get to grips with what the root cause analysis really demonstrates and begin to unpack what we're learning, I think the BOSSR will likely arrive with some questions and concerns, and we'll be sure to engage closely with you and, of course, with the CAISO staff to make sure that we're understanding how decisions might unfold and issues might be corrected. But I very much appreciate the open invitation. I think we are all impacted, whether we're part of the EIM directly or not, when these events happen, and making sure that we build a resilient market that can weather these extreme weather events is critical. So I appreciate your close engagement on these issues.
Okay, great. And again, thanks for all your work and the work of BOSSR to make this market what it is. Okay, thanks again for your time. So with that, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a Regional Issues Forum update by Pam Sporborg with Portland General Electric. If we can get Pam on the line.
I'm unmuting her now.
Hi, this is Pam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, John. The Regional Issues Forum is actively planning for 2021. We plan to continue in our modified virtual format, and we have selected the following tentative dates for RIF meetings, which are March 9th, May 4th, June 29th, September 7th, and December 2nd. And while we have not finalized any agenda items yet, as you and Chair Tawney note, resource adequacy is clearly a preeminent issue for stakeholders in the region and is likely to be a topic at the Regional Issues Forum this year. We are also in the process of selecting a liaison to fill the open public interest organizations position. Nominations are due by this Friday, January 22nd, and a sector call has been scheduled for Thursday, January 28th. And once we have received all of the nominations, CAISO will send out a notice and an email with participation details for that meeting on the 28th. And that is the conclusion of my remarks today.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Any questions from the governing body members? Okay, hearing nothing. Pam, before I let you go, I have an ask of RIF similar to what I asked of BOSSR. the discussion we just had a few minutes ago. And it deals with our agenda item coming up right after this, where we're going to discuss the EIM performance during those extreme conditions from last summer. And I want to make sure that the RIF members are as engaged on this topic as they see fit. And certainly I'm not asking for another process to start, but perhaps the RIF could engage its members to participate and encourage them in this initiative. It's known as, I'm sure you know this, the Market Enhancements for Summer 2021 Readiness. So if there's anything the RIF could do to make sure that people have, if they have any concerns, they should go to that process. And if those concerns are not being addressed, anybody can contact any one of us on the governing body to discuss issues that may not see the light of day or they're concerned about. So I would appreciate any help you and the RIF could give to that effort.
John, I really appreciate that charge and the request that you made. I recognize and appreciate that you and the governing body are taking the issue of resource adequacy so seriously. I agree that as the events of last summer illustrate, getting resource adequacy right is of critical importance to the region and to the ongoing success of the EIM. And there are certainly a symbiotic relationship between resource adequacy in the ISO's market and resource sufficiency in the energy imbalance market. I will certainly work with the liaisons to ensure that all of the issues in this nexus have been fully identified and explored, either through the ISO's workshop process, the governing body's process, or if there's any remaining issues, we can use the EIM Regional Issues Forum to illuminate and discuss those issues as well. If the liaisons provide any issues that haven't been fully or adequately addressed, I will certainly provide you with an updated list of those issues at the next governing body meeting in March. I think this is a great opportunity to ensure that a critically important issue is fully identified and addressed going into an important stakeholder process and the summer season. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam, for that. I appreciate your willingness, and I'm sure the RIF will want to do what they can to support it. Remember, our goal here is to make a good market even better. So what happened last summer was, like you said, an opportunity for us to now learn from that and make the market function even better for everybody. So, yeah, we stand all ready to serve, so you can contact any of us if you need any help with that. So, again, thank you, Pam, and we will move on to the next agenda item, which we've already kind of set up. This is listed as a discussion on the Western EIM performance during the summer 2020 events. And I'm going to kick it off with kind of an opening statement to kind of frame what it is that I'm looking for, and then turn it to the other governing body members to kick off the discussion. So let me start by stating the purpose of this particular agenda item. The purpose of this discussion is for the governing body to better understand the evaluation of the EIM performance during the events of last August and September, and to assure support for market improvements to better handle EIM operations during extreme conditions. The Western energy imbalance market has been very successful, with gross benefits now exceeding $1.1 billion. That's incredible. Because of the events of last summer, we now have the opportunity to make the EIM even better and to assure the transparency and attention required to facilitate an expansion into an extended day-ahead market if the participants so desire. A little bit of background on our concerns and why we're interested in this. The governing body is an independent governing body with a very clear charter. And if you look in our charter on page 3, it actually, section 2.1 is our mission. And I'm going to read just part of that because I think it's really important that everybody knows where we're coming from and what our responsibilities are as a governing body. Our mission: the EIM governing body shall promote, protect, and expand the success of the EIM for the benefit of its participants as a whole, with due consideration of the interests of all participants in the ISO's real-time market, including both participants transacting in the balancing authority area, that is the ISO's balancing authority area, and participants transacting in EIM balancing authority areas, and that means the balancing authority areas of EIM entities collectively. So that is at the highest level the mission and why we have an interest to dig in and understand what's going on in this particular event. Now, there is a stakeholder process currently underway, and you've already heard it mentioned a couple of times, and it's called the Market Enhancements for Summer of 2021 Readiness. And it includes EIM topics, and Commissioner Tawney alluded to some of them, but certainly resource efficiency, Pam just talked about that, is included in there, and other things that do impact the EIM. The current schedule for that proposal to come out from that initiative is it would come before us and the Board of Governors in March with a proposal. And at this point, I think a big thanks is in order to staff. And they've worked hard on this, and all the participants trying to get to the bottom of this. I appreciate that. Staff has done a great job so far. Really want to commend what they've done and some of the discussions they've had. Various governing body members have sat in on those discussions. Now, I also recognize that staff has pulled in many different directions and has limited resources, and our job is to assure that the EIM as a whole is transparently evaluated and all participant concerns and suggestions get considered and discussed as part of this initiative. This discussion today is not intended to create another stakeholder initiative or to be a technical discussion on this topic, but rather it is meant to be a discussion for the governing body to seek assurances that all stakeholder concerns, including the governing body members' concerns, will be considered and any proposed market improvements are transparent, fair, and equitable to all market participants as stated in our charter. And if concerns are not being addressed, we need to know so they can be inserted into the current process. And you can engage with the Regional Issues Forum, as you just heard. You can engage with the body of state regulators, or if there's still concerns out there, you can contact any of us directly, any of us on the governing body. And so with that introduction, I will open it up for any comments from each governing body member, starting with Anita, and then I'll go to Carl, and then Val, and then Rob, and then we will open it up for public comment. So with that, Anita?
Thanks, John. And that was a really nice introduction to maybe opening up this topic a little bit more broadly. In the root cause analysis, the EIM is mentioned, but it's almost like we're mentioned in passing. So that left me a little not sure that the EIM benefits were really demonstrated within the RCA. And I'm sure they're there, but I thought it was a little late. I take seriously the job of the governing body and the things that we are overseeing in terms of on behalf of the EIM participants. I've listened into a number of the stakeholder calls, looking at the summer readiness and what the initiatives are, and there's a couple things that I'm not very clear about, even though I've listened in on the calls. And the first one is the issue of resource sufficiency, and there have been conflicting comments made as the calls have progressed about whether there really was resource sufficiency in the CalISO and whether there was really resource sufficiency in all hours or not, and whether there's a level playing field for all the entities as they are tested for resource sufficiency. So I'm looking for a little more understanding that and how do the EIM entities play into that, including the CalISO. And then I think the second thing, oftentimes I've heard comments about the playing field isn't level, and that concerns me. And so I'm interested if there's a way to do this really simply. I'm not looking for a big report. I'm not looking for lots of staff time. If there's 3 or 4 issues that are clearly different between the CalISO's balancing authority and the voluntary EIM entities that continue to be REVs, I'm going to guess that the staff knows what those are. And I'd really like to have just a one-page, these are the things that are different, and just so that, when I hear them, I have a better understanding of, yep, we know these things there's not a level playing field on these issues. So those are just a couple things on my mind about not only the heat event, but also looking at where the playing field is not considered to be equal.
Okay, thanks, Anita. I made those notes, and maybe after we have all of our comments or discussion, maybe we'll turn to staff to see if they're ready to address any of these, not necessarily now, but put them on a list where they can address them. Okay, did you have anything else, Anita?
No, that'll do it.
Okay, Carl.
Thank you, John. You framed it well, as usual. I want to reinforce one of your points that we're not creating a new initiative here or a new proceeding. So I just want to make sure people understand I'm not requesting separate attention or separate filings that would come to me or to us through this discussion, but rather that this is a way, I think, of me conveying an issue that I'm following closely and that I will take advantage of the existing stakeholder process as well as the other conversations that are going on in California and around the West as I seek to gain comfort on this particular issue. And the issue I'm going to choose is not, I don't consider it to be the only issue. I do think it's one where I have special interest and some experience, so I'm choosing to dig in on this, and that is the ensuring that there's a level playing field for distributed energy resources, aggregated distributed energy resources, and demand response. And trying to gain comfort that we're doing as much as we can to accelerate the contribution of demand-side resources this summer and putting ourselves in position to have even a greater access to those resources the following summer. And I'm interested that the California ISO is doing its part to remove barriers, but that more generally we're understanding why we're not getting as much contribution from demand-side resources as it seems to me is possible, and what things we can do, I can do, what the EIM can do, and what the California ISO can do to help to make these resources a larger and more solid contributor along with the supply-side resources that are being tapped. So that's all, John. Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that. Those are good comments, and I've got it on my list, and we'll bring that up at the end here. Okay, moving on to Val.
Thank you, Chair Prescott, for today's agenda item and for today's discussion. And I am very grateful for what Vice Chair Decker and Member Lindahl have indicated. It's always very educational for me, and I share their interest. I'm going to keep my comments brief and at a very high level. And fundamentally, I look forward to better understanding the issues that most concern our stakeholders, but I think it's also worth pointing out at this juncture that there were times in the past, and this is likely to be the case going forward, when we as a governing body approved or recommended for approval fixes that were proposed to improve the EIM that were really what ultimately amounted to incremental steps. And we knew that there were going to be additional changes that would be required down the road. But we approved those changes because despite those changes not being holistic solutions, they nevertheless improved the market. As a governing body, we've remained focused on making the EIM a more efficient, logical, and reliable market. I have, on occasion, listened in to the stakeholder meetings. I'm impressed by the broad engagement of the stakeholders. I also note that the opinions or proposals that are put forward, even the way the questions are asked, show some pretty divergent views. But I will also note that the EIM, and it's obvious from all the efforts that have been involved, continues to be work in progress, and the goal is always to make it a more efficient and effective market. The heat wave event of August 2020 is a driving force behind the current stakeholder process, which we hope result in enhancements that avoid the repeat of last summer's problems. I also had the benefit, and it is a huge benefit, of participating in the Governance Review Committee. And again, I see even there very divergent perspectives on the various aspects of the market. But my overarching hope is that the interests, as divergent as they might be, and a lot of it comes down to sort of CAISO versus non-CAISO types of interests, can meet somewhere in a place where the fixes being pursued are doable, are clear market improvements, and can be done timely without starting all over from the beginning. If our discussions today and going forward help to advance the EIM and our understanding of what's working and what's not working as a governing body, we'll only be even better able to strategically determine the priority of market improvements and the implications of any delays. Like Carl, I would not ask for, and like John, I wouldn't propose that we launch any sort of new stakeholder process at this point. But I do greatly appreciate this opportunity for the discussion. So thank you very much, Chair Prescott.
Well, thank you, Val. I always appreciate your wise counsel and the idea of trying to resolve these things without starting over. I think there's a lot of wisdom there, and that's my hope as well. So thanks for that. So, okay, we'll move on to Rob.
John, thank you. And I appreciate the thoughtful comments that Anita and Carl and Val have already provided. And I don't see a particular need to go back through and repeat what they've said. I certainly endorse their perspectives on that. As we look at moving forward and to our March meeting and ultimately making certain that the EIM is prepared for summer 2021, that as we review our work, that there are some fundamental questions we collectively should address. And for the most part, I think we already know the answers, and we already know that they're being worked on. But I do think it's worth noting that, we should be asking ourselves, did the EIM perform as designed and expected? Did it meet requirements? And maybe importantly, were there any anomalies identified? And did the EIM help reliability for the system during the summer heat wave? And was the EIM effective in helping acquire resources within the operating market time frame? And then lastly, could the EIM have done more during the times of highest stress on the system? Again, we've seen a lot of work being done ever since September till now. Many of you have mentioned the workshop that took place last week, and a lot of good information was presented. But one thing I haven't seen in the report that came out on the root cause analysis, or really with any definitivity, is what happened on September 6th. And I think that as part of our collective work that the governing body should be briefed on the events of what occurred on that evening. Apparently there were some EIM issues that caused some big A-swing on some of the EIM entities. Again, the good news to report is that Cal ISO staff fully aware of this. They've looked into it, and they are already working towards identifying solutions so that they can get them implemented in time for summer 2021. But maybe that big picture one beyond the details are, and this is a more of a high level issue, is when we bring new EIM participants on board, there is a lot of education and training that goes on, especially how to use all the systems and how to make certain that things perform well. And one thing that may have been uncovered during this times of stress is that maybe we don't have the EIM, the new entities, when they go live, as much information as to what should be done in working with their other VAs when things go wrong. And I think there may be some opportunities in there And again, this is one I believe that the Cal ISO staff may already be aware of and may have already put together some thoughts on how to get that addressed. And with that, John, I conclude my remarks.
Well, again, like the others, Rob, I appreciate your thoughtful comments. And, you know, you made a couple of them that I really appreciated, like we should be well informed as to how the EIM reacted during that stress time. And did it react as designed, I think is what you said. And further, it may have reacted as designed, but is the design correct? And I think you kind of lead into that with your other comments. But a couple of takeaways I've got from your comments is that we probably need a briefing, the governing body does, on September 6th, what happened exactly as it relates to the EIM, and to make sure those are included in this initiative that's going on. And then I like your idea of maybe looking at the onboarding process for new market participants, and we've got quite a few coming up right away. Make sure that that training is expanded to include, during these times of stress, how do you work with the other BAAs? So that's a really good point. Well, what I'd like to do then maybe is just kind of reiterate what I see as some of the actions, and then maybe ask Mark Rockleader or whoever you designate, Mark, to jump in and offer any comments. Again, we don't expect solutions, but if you could add any comments to these points and then maybe put it on your list to see that staff does include these things that the governing body is requesting. And the first one, and I'll go through the list and then bring you on, Mark. So the first one was Anita was talking about maybe somehow we can better define where the playing field is not level in the EIM during these stressful conditions. And I think some of those things are being discussed, but maybe they can be specifically pointed out to us. That would be useful. Carl brought up a good point about how is demand side resources, how are they being included into this initiative? And those certainly do work into the energy balance market. So it would be good to get some insight as to how they're going to be integrated. Let's see. Oh, and make sure Val's comments about working really hard with all the participants to come to a resolution without throwing everything out and starting over again. I think that's just a really wise and important comment. So that needs to be put into the process. Let's see. And then moving on to Rob, he had some nuggets there, including set up that briefing I mentioned on the September 6th issues as related to the EIM, and then to review the training for onboarding to include, stressed events and how to coordinate with your neighbors. So first of all, before Mark comes up, any corrections from the governing body or anything, any additions?
No.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So Mark, I think you're kind of your show.
Hey, John. John, could I just, this is Carl, just one, Anita had a concern on resource efficiency. I don't know if that was something she was hoping Mark would address or not.
Yeah, good point. I forgot that was on here. That was my concern, too, that I brought up. So, and that one is being addressed, but I just want to make sure that Mark knows that that's something we're really concerned about, because we are hearing out and about that being an issue. Was any more to add on that, Anita? Make sure it gets covered.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. Thank you. I was listening there, so thank you very much for making sure that John saw that. I figured that he had, but and it is something I want to. Yes, I've heard on the calls. Yes, it's being addressed. I would just like a little better understanding of is it going to be addressed? So, is it going to level the playing field? Actually, is it going to level the playing field or not? That's really the fundamental question.
So it kind of ties into your second point, too.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks. Okay, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Prescott and governing body members. I really appreciate the discussion you're having. It is an important discussion, and that is why we have taken it up as an initiative as part of our readiness for this summer. Let me start with saying the root cause analysis didn't dive deeply into this because, first and foremost, EIM was not identified as any root cause to the events leading to the need to shed load in the California ISO on August 14th and 15th. And our initial review indicated that the energy imbalance market generally identified where there was resource efficiency issues, more specifically flexibility issues in the ISO, and it took the designed actions to freeze or limit the amount of transfers the ISO would be getting from other balancing areas that were participating in the EIM at that point. And in fact, we saw transfers coming into the ISO helping alleviate some of the supply issues that we were encountering on the August 14th and 15th. So that's what was addressed in the root cause analysis. Now, from a broader perspective, yes, we committed to taking a broader look at how the energy imbalance market performed, and we in fact had already started doing that in parallel even before the last week's workshop. And in that regard, we identified a couple of additional things. One, while the flexibility test seemed to work the way it was designed and did identify California ISO being insufficient during those tight conditions, we did identify that the test that happens before the flexibility test, that being the capacity test, we did identify some additional issues there that didn't allow the capacity test to accurately identify capacity insufficiencies leading up to the flexibility test. And those two issues will be fixed, will be addressed. But from our observations, at least on the August 14th and 15th events, because the flexibility test did pick it up, we don't believe that there was a material consequence of missing that test. Now, it does raise the broader issue, would the capacity test picked up other periods of time on other days or other periods? At this point, that would require further investigation and look at it, but nonetheless, we're committed to addressing the observations that occurred with regards to the capacity sufficiency test. We also took a broader look and looked at, it was mentioned around September 6th. September 6th was interesting because we were, again, under stress conditions. However, there also were some other contingency events, including one of the poles on the Pacific DC intertie basically blocked and caused schedules to be cut and caused challenges on the Pacific AC or the AC system in terms of voltages and flows, which then triggered a set of events where we saw congestion occur and some of the base schedules or non-EIM schedules between us and EIM balancing areas result in getting cut. And I think the lessons learned at a high level from that is that, yes, additional coordination and potentially automation could be introduced and should be introduced to better coordinate the net scheduled interchanges and the coordination of the net scheduled interchanges between the different EIM balancing areas faced with stress conditions and contingency events. And we have identified at least two, probably three specific action items there that we believe we will take action on ahead of this summer. In terms of the level playing field, I really do believe the design does provide a level playing field. Now, I have to say that while I believe there's a level playing field, the interaction for the ISO is different than EIM balancing areas because the ISO is continuing to run a hour-ahead scheduling process and a 15-minute market overlay on top of the energy imbalance market. And I think as a result of that, the interplay between the Cal ISO and the relative to other EIM entities may be different but I don't believe that it creates a unlevel playing field. That said, I think that from the workshop that occurred last week, there are some additional ideas about when the capacity test fails, what should be the resultant consequences of a failure, regardless whether it's an ISO or any other EIM balancing area. And we are taking those under consideration as to if we need to modify or enhance or change the consequence of a capacity failure when a failure occurs. Now, the balancing act that we have to strike here is we certainly do not want the energy imbalance market to inappropriately lean on other balancing areas. At the same time, we do want to allow for balancing areas to share and transfer energy that is economically still available during these conditions. And that's an important factor, because if we just say if there's a failure and you cut off all transfers from neighboring balancing areas, we may actually create worse conditions while there is economic and available supply available between balancing areas. At the same time, we want to make sure that the principles of the resource sufficiency test are intact and don't do inappropriate leaning or prevent inappropriate leaning, thus potentially dragging other balancing areas into emergency conditions or depleting their sufficiency. And we believe we have mechanisms to do that already, but we are reviewing whether those mechanisms are sufficient or need to be augmented or enhanced further to create that right balance between inappropriately leaning and allowing for available supply, economically available supply to still transfer, even times when there is stress conditions or a balancing area is insufficient. So those are the important discussions that are taking place, and we believe through the stakeholder process and our review of that will strike the right balance and be in a incrementally better place for this summer relative to the energy imbalance market. Regarding demand side, this is something we are coordinating with the California Public Utility Commissions. They have a docket open where they're considering whether to allow for additional demand response capability under emergency conditions to allow more opportunity for demand response to provide kind of an insurance policy. We support that notion, but we also are seeing how the demand response that is under resource adequacy performed and looking for opportunities to see how that can be improved, if there's any opportunity to ensure that that improves and how we account for that is improved so that we can rely on demand response going forward. So we think that that will generate some additional ideas, and we certainly believe demand response is part of the solution, but we must have a sufficient resource adequacy, and we must be able to rely on whatever resources that are providing resource adequacy to respond when we have these events or when we have tight conditions. So that's in summary, and I appreciate the interest in this, and we look forward to briefing the governing body more as we get deeper into the options and the solution set to the this is one item among 7 items that we're taking up for the summer.
Okay, I have just one question for you, Mark, and then I'm going to open it up for any follow-up from the other governing body members, and then we're going to go to public comment. But so these discussions that you talk about and all these different topics, are they going to be included in the initiative that market enhancements for summer 2021 readiness?
Yes, they will. The Summer Readiness Initiative has 7 items. One of the items includes EIM performance and opportunities to improve upon that. And within that, there is the review of the capacity or the sufficiency test, and then also incorporating the learnings that we would apply from the September 6th event.
Okay, good. Because I've been referring to that initiative throughout this meeting, and I want to make sure that it's still the place that is the active initiative. And
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So with that, I would open it up to any governing body member that wants any follow-on, or if they want to dig deeper, or any other asks. Okay, so I guess I'd ask you, Bob. Go ahead.
Just, I'll be brief on this, because there may be time at another meeting to go into this. And Mark, I greatly appreciate your comments and perspective and where you're moving forward on this. With respect to the EIM and emergencies, I don't want to belabor the issue of when we move it to strictly a reliability issue. I would hope that we would always be able to lean on the EIM if there is a EEA declared to where VA assistance can be used through the EIM to get there. And I know there's a lot of complexities there, and I think we'll just save the discussion for another day, but I don't think that should be removed off the table.
I agree, and I think that goes to striking the right balance of allowing EIM to perform and help the situation, but not to the point where it potentially is detrimental or drags another balancing area into an emergency or worse emergency condition.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, any other governing body member comments? Okay, I guess just before we go to public comments, thanks, Mark. I appreciate the work you've done on this and your staff, and I really see, as we've discussed, this is a golden opportunity to make a great market even better, and then make sure that we can transition to a day-ahead market if the participants so choose, and have all these issues resolved before we get there. So thanks. So with that, on this particular discussion item, I'd like to ask if there's any public comment on the phone. Adam?
All right, and ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to make a public comment, just a reminder that you press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. All right, and I see no public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And then I was also notified that the CEO of the ISO would like to make a comment, so if we could get Elliot unmuted.
Yes, thank you, Chair Prescott. I believe I am hopefully unmuted, and I just wanted to briefly, first of all, thank you and the other members of the governing body for this session. Also to Mark, thank you for your response. I just wanted to reiterate on behalf of all of us at the ISO just how committed we are to taking on these issues as transparently as possible. You guys have raised some really critical issues. The functioning and the efficiency and the level playing field associated with the energy imbalance market are extremely important to us, as are, of course, the foundational resource adequacy improvements that we're all working on across the West to make sure that we're operating as sufficiently and as reliably as we possibly can. So I just wanted to express all our appreciation for this session, and we look forward to the balance of the winter and the spring and working with all of our stakeholders and market participants to make sure we've got as clear-eyed view as possible about the issues and get them resolved as expeditiously as possible. So thanks again for what I thought was a very productive session.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Elliot. Yeah, this is something that's critical to all of us, so I appreciate the support at your level. Okay, I think we're probably ready to move on. Well, one last opportunity for any comments. Okay, let's move on. See Carl shaking his head to move on, so we're moving. Let's see. It's item number 7, which is briefing on policy initiatives, roadmap, and annual plan. And I think Anna, you're up.
Yes, good afternoon, governing body. And today we're going to give you, I think we gave you a briefing on this before, but we have since formalized, if you wish, our annual plan for next year for where we will be focusing our efforts on our stakeholder initiatives
And as you know, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. Late last year, and in light of the many of the issues we've been discussing here today, we did some reprioritization with our efforts and have announced our commitment to resolve in the first part of this year the issues that, and within our markets and our rules that will help us to ensure readiness for next summer. We have with us today Greg Cook, Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure and Policy, and he will be providing you with the briefing, and I believe he's on the line. And with that, I will turn that over to him.
Thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, Chair Prescott and members of the governing body. So I will be presenting our 3-year policy initiative roadmap and annual plan. As you've already heard quite a bit about already this afternoon, we have planned for a new initiative, the Market Enhancements for Summer 2021 Readiness, which has had some impacts on our planning for the year. So I will show you at the end of my presentation how that's going to fit into our annual plan. Next slide, please, Christina. So just a little background. We do this. This is an annual process that starts late summer, early fall, where we first collect all of the potential policy initiatives, and we do that through a stakeholder process. It's called our catalog process, where we put out a draft catalog that includes all of the initiatives we at the ISO know about. And then we also ask stakeholders for their input on initiatives that they would like to see us undertake. And once we have the full slate of initiatives before us, then we go through a prioritization process. So next slide, please. And we do that. That prioritization process starts by first identifying what are the primary drivers that are really causing us to need to evolve our policies in our markets. So if you go to the next slide, we've identified 3 primary drivers for this year. They're relatively similar to the drivers we saw last year, but we have refined them somewhat. The first one, it's probably no surprise given what we saw in August, is resource sufficiency. And, looking back, we've identified that we really need to take a look at our resource adequacy requirements and make sure that those are aligned with not only the changing nature of the resources and the load that we're seeing, but also what we're also experiencing tightening supply conditions throughout the West. And we need to ensure that we have resource sufficiency, not only for meeting the peak load, which is what they've been primarily focused on in the past, but also the net peak load, including our reserve margins, the load and supply uncertainty that we're seeing as we have more variable energy resources added to the fleet, and then also making sure that we have accurate resource crediting, meaning that we are accurately providing capacity credits to resources in the way that they actually help us meet our grid reliability needs. And then the second primary driver that we identified was related to that, but that increased resource and load variability. Again, as we're seeing more rooftop solar added, we're seeing more volatile loads, as well as we continue to move forward in moving towards a low-carbon grid. We're having more variable energy resources on the system. So there's increased variability, particularly between the day-ahead and real-time markets. So we're looking at enhancing our day-ahead market as well as extending that day-ahead market to EIM entities so that we can ensure that we're scheduling resources in a way to meet that variability, but also leverage some of that regional diversity to provide benefits across the Western interconnection. And then finally, the third driver is new technologies. The primary new technology we're seeing today is a lot of interconnection of new storage resources. So we need to ensure that we're keeping our markets, evolving them so that they can efficiently integrate those new resources into our markets as well. And particularly that they're able to provide those operational attributes that have been previously provided by the thermal fleet that we're seeing retire as we go into the future. Next slide, please. So we'll start with our comprehensive redesign of resource adequacy. We put the CAT into 3 categories of policy development, the first being resource adequacy, the second market design, and the third, energy storage and distributed energy resources. So starting with the resource adequacy, again, we think that there's a significant amount of reforms that are needed on the IS. And again, the resource adequacy is both requirements through the CPUC's RA program, as well as provisions that we have in the ISO tariff. So what we're focusing on here are potential changes to the ISO tariff that we think would help to align those resource adequacy requirements with our operational needs. Now, this is an extremely large implementation effort because we're looking at some pretty significant reforms. We're phasing this over 2 years. So the phase 1, which will be implemented in this year, in the fall of this year, we're looking at enhanced import, RA import provisions, and this would be to ensure that there are actual physical resources or backing RA imports into the ISO market. Looking at some planned outage process enhancements. This could have more enhanced substitution rules to ensure that we have sufficient capacity in the event of planned outages, particularly during tight supply periods. Looking at enhancing some of our local studies, as well as our backstop authorities related to having more use-limited and availability-limited resources providing our local reliability needs. And then finally, operationalizing storage. And this is, again, making sure that we have provisions in place so that the storage resources that are shown as meeting resource adequacy requirements are available to meet our operational needs, and in particular, that they're available when we need them to meet our net load peaks. And then finally, the second phase, which would be implementing a year later, we would be looking at changing the way that we count resources, moving to an unforced capacity counting methodology. This is similar to counting methodology used by the Eastern ISOs, and this bases capacity values on resources' historical availability. We think this will give us a more accurate assessment of resources capabilities. We're also proposing to incorporate a portfolio analysis. This would do a production analysis of the RA fleet to ensure that it can meet all of the operational needs of the system, ensure that they can work together to meet those needs. And then finally, some enhancements that we'll ultimately need to align the resource adequacy program with the day-ahead market enhancements. And this would be changing some of our must-offer obligations, as well as the way that we define flexible resource adequacy. Next slide, please. So next, moving into the markets. Again, these are enhancements to our day-ahead and real-time markets. The first one, as you're well aware of, is the Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative. This has been ongoing last year. It will be continuing, and we're hoping to finish the stakeholder process this year. This is really primarily an operations-driven initiative to ensure that we can schedule supply to meet the net load and address that uncertainty that materializes between the day-ahead and real-time markets. We believe that this will provide some significant efficiencies to our market, as well as better price signals by being able to co-optimize scheduling those imbalance reserves in the day-ahead time frame with both energy and ancillary services. And we think at the end of the day, this will significantly minimize the need for out-of-market actions that our operators are having to take today to meet those operational requirements. Okay, next slide, please. Next, the EDAM, extending the day-ahead market to EIM entities. We'll be continuing that policy development this year as well. As you're well aware, we started that last year. We believe that'll provide significant benefits by allowing us to optimize day-ahead unit commitment over a larger set of resources, produce hourly schedules for EIM entities, and also help us more efficiently utilize transmission across a much larger footprint. Next slide, please. I think you're also aware of this, but it's a very large initiative. We split the topics up into 3 bundles. We're continuing to focus on Bundle 1. That will be continuing the focus this year as well. Those are some of the primary issues that we need to resolve, we believe, before moving on to the second bundles. And then since the time here, I'll continue to move on because I think we've talked about this in the past. So next slide. We are proposing a few new initiatives on the roadmap this year. The first one is what we're calling the Dispatch Enhancements Initiative, and this is really to help us improve the way that we manage the increasing fleet of renewable resources. And in particular, we're looking at managing ramp rates to better control system balance. This is particularly becoming an issue as we're having more solar and storage resources on the system. They tend to ramp in almost instantaneously, which can lead to control issues on the grid. So we need to be able to manage those ramp rates to address those issues. Also looking at some enhanced market incentives to ensure that these resources are following their dispatch instructions and provide accurate curtailment responses, because we really need to ensure once these are a larger portion of our fleet that we have very accurate response from the renewable fleet. And then finally, we have a couple of items related to decrementing resources as we may be in more frequent oversupply conditions as well during some of the off-peak periods. And this would be exploring potential solutions for decremental market power mitigation, which we currently do not have in our market, as well as looking at better settlement rules for when we do decremental exceptional dispatches. Okay, next slide, please. Another new initiative we're planning on the roadmap is a scarcity pricing initiative. And this is in large part in response to some of the summer 2020 tight supply conditions that we saw. We want to improve the scarcity pricing provisions, particularly so that we have the right price signals during tight supply conditions. We also think with better scarcity pricing provisions, this will help provide the right incentives to ensure that we have accurate day-ahead scheduling and bidding that aligns with the expected operational needs in real time due to tight supply conditions. And then finally, looking at that relationship between those new scarcity pricing provisions to how they could work with a system market power mitigation design, as well as how they would work with the new FERC Order 831 provisions, which increase our bid cap to $2,000. So next slide, please. And finally, the last new market design initiative we're also putting on the roadmap is a frequency response initiative. This is an initiative that we have committed to FERC that we would take on as we're seeing more renewables added to the system. For the ISO balancing authority area, we're finding, particularly during high renewable output and low load times, the ISO at times may be short of meeting its share of the WEC frequency, its response requirements. And so we've been meeting that for the last few years by putting out a request for offers for transferring some of the ISO's frequency response obligation to other balancing authority areas. That's been working fairly well for the last few years, but ultimately the expectation is that we would develop a market product so that we could potentially procure that response capability from resources within the ISO markets. And then finally, we'll also be looking at some regulation product enhancements as part of that initiative as well, enhancing some of the pay-for-performance payments that we have, as well as looking at some of the minimum performance criteria. Again, we're trying to make sure that we have the right incentives for fast, accurate regulation resources in our market. Next slide, please. So then the last area is integrated distributed energy and storage resources. So next slide. As you're probably all well aware, we just recently received FERC Order 2222, and so we are under a compliance obligation to be in line with the provisions of that order. Fortunately, that order was largely modeled off of provisions that the ISO already has in its market, and so we are currently doing a gap analysis of what we currently have to what's required under FERC Order 2222, and looking to ensure that we can fill in those gaps. Again, we don't believe those to be significant gaps as we're largely aligned with the order already. We will be looking to make a compliance filing in July. Okay, next slide, please. And then on the energy storage and distributed energy resource front, we really want to switch our focus this year to implementation and doing some evaluation and cleanup is what we're calling it. So we're almost taking a bit of pause on additional policy development at this time, and the reason for that is we've done a significant amount of policy development over the last couple of years, so we think at this point it's important that we really need to focus on implementing that policy development. that was included in ESDR 3B and ESDR 4. So that functionality will be going in 2021 as well as 2022. And then once that new functionality is in place, it'll give us an opportunity to really evaluate how well is that working, and in consideration of that, then we consider new enhancements based on that evaluation. And then we also want to continue our focus on operationalizing the distributed energy resources into our markets. This is enhancements to some of the distributed energy resource systems and tools. We're currently putting in new tools so that we can provide a pre-dispatch, for example, for demand response resources that have a long lead time into our market. We're also looking at enhancements to visibility so that we have greater visibility into how those resources are operating, incorporating their operations into our forecasting, and finally, as I already mentioned, as part of the resource adequacy enhancements, operationalizing storage, making sure that our markets are effectively integrating them in a way that is aligned with the operational needs of the system. So next slide, please. We're also having a new initiative next year on the hybrid resources. As you're well aware, we had the two initiatives last year, hybrid phase 1 and 2, and we committed to having the hybrid evolution initiative to, once we have some experience with how those resources are operating into our market, that we could look at potentially adding some additional functionality based on that operational experience. But then there's also a couple of gaps that we also need to fill in. We do not currently have market power mitigation for those resources, or we need to design, we also need to design the resource adequacy must offer obligations for those resources. Next slide, please. So this gets us into our 3-year roadmap and annual plan. So next slide. So a large driver of the 3-year roadmap is the coordinated policy development that we need among the day-ahead market enhancements, the resource adequacy enhancements, and then the EDAM. And this chart really shows how all of those need to function together at the end of the day for us to have, a high-functioning market. And if you start on the left side of this chart, you can see that the resource adequacy enhancements and requirements need to be designed in a way so that we can meet the requirements of the EDAM resource sufficiency evaluation. And similarly, that we would be expecting the EDAM entities to be enhancing their integrated resource plan so they can also meet the requirements of what's being designed as part of the resource sufficiency evaluation in EDAM. And then that will then feed into our day-ahead market, which will have the new product of imbalanced reserves, which should then ensure that we are setting up the OPRA obligations for resources that are then ultimately offered into the EIM resource sufficiency evaluation and ultimately optimized in the real-time market. So the next slide, please. So given that, this is our proposed 3-year roadmap of the major policy initiatives. This shows the timing and scheduling of the initiatives we currently have underway, as well as the new initiatives that I talked about. Just to explain this chart, the blue diamonds depict implementation dates for various market initiatives, and then the orange boxes depict the policy development timelines. Again, we generally have major releases in the fall of each year, which is where you see those blue diamonds lining up. And, I think the point on this chart is we have, significant policy development and implementation scheduled out, over the next 3 years. And so we're trying to, as efficiently as possible, schedule all of our resources to meet these needs. The diamonds tend to depict where issues are continuing on from the previous year, and then you can see when we would be starting several of the new initiatives that we've proposed to be on the roadmap. So next slide, please. But as we've talked about this morning, we are proposing a new initiative in response to the summer 2020 events, and this is going to require us to reprioritize a lot of our near-term stakeholder efforts. We really want to make sure that the ISO, as well as stakeholders, focus the near-term efforts on those market rules and changes that we need to be ready for next summer in the event that we have another heat wave event. So in order to accommodate that, we were rescheduling some of our existing and planned market design stakeholder initiatives. We're still maintaining the current schedule for the infrastructure policy stakeholder initiatives, but we will be focusing our internal resources as well as the broader stakeholder community on addressing those changes for the summer of 2021. And those policy changes that will require tariff amendments will need to be filed with FERC by April for us to be able to implement those by June. So that would require us to come to you and the ISO board in March in order to get that approval to meet that timeline. So it's a very expedited stakeholder process. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of what the scope of that initiative would entail. We're looking at, the first one is export and load priorities. We held a workshop last Tuesday where we had a good discussion on how the ISO as well as other balancing authority areas in the West prioritize their load and exports. So we're using that information to formulate a straw proposal on that issue. The second one is reliability, demand response, resource dispatch, and real-time price impacts. So we're looking for enhancements so that these RDRR resource dispatches do not mute some of the price signals we see, particularly during tight supply periods. That was one thing we saw as we look back at the root cause analysis. We're looking at requirements for storage resources as well during tight supply conditions. And these would be enhancements to ensure that we're avoiding charging during tight supply conditions, and also to ensure that resources are available when necessary to meet net peak loads and other operational needs. The fourth one is cost recovery provisions for hourly block imports during tight supply conditions. And I think what we're really looking at here is ensuring that we have the right import and export market incentives during tight supply conditions. So we're looking at some potential enhancements in that area. And then the fifth one is short-term scarcity pricing enhancements. And, you know, this is somewhat limited scope in that really looking at, are there things that we can do in our markets to ensure that we're providing efficient scheduling and bidding behavior in tight supply conditions. And again, this will be separate from the more comprehensive changes that we would be considering in the new initiative that we'll be starting later this year. And then finally, number 6, when we already talked about a bit this afternoon, the EIM coordination and resource efficiency test review. So again, this was one that was discussed at a workshop last Wednesday, where we're considering and we'll be proposing some improvements to the resource sufficiency evaluation for summer 2021. And there may also be provisions that come out of that that would not necessarily be something that we'd be able to resolve within that short timeline, but maybe put on consideration for further consideration later this year. And then number 7 is kind of a catch-all, which is other items that are identified by stakeholders that we could vet through the stakeholder process and be implemented by the 1st of June. We've already identified a couple of additional items. First is some enhancements that would allow our interconnection customers to add capacity on an expedited basis for this summer. And we're also considering enhancements to our resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism to see if we can provide strengthened incentives for resource adequacy resources to be available during tight supply conditions. So next slide, please. So to make room for this new initiative, which is shown here in the bright yellow, we are pushing off I think I would describe it as a short hiatus on several of our market design initiatives. We had planned to start that comprehensive scarcity pricing initiative in January of this year. We'll now be looking to start that in the second quarter. We'll be taking a bit of a pause on the day-ahead market enhancements as well, and EDAM to, again, to sure that we can maintain our focus on that new summer 2021 readiness initiative. And then we'll be also pushing out the start of the dispatch enhancements in the joint own unit modeling initiative. But as you can see at the top of this, there's several initiatives that will also maintain their current schedules, including the resource adequacy enhancements, as well as our compliance with FERC Order 222 and a couple of the EIM initiatives that we have underway. For instance, the sub-entity scheduling coordinator initiative, as well as the EIM governance review. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, we're just finally at the very end of the schedule of the process. We presented this to the Board of Governors on December 17th and providing your briefing here today. And we will continue to update you throughout the year as the schedules change, and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Really appreciate that detailed report. That's very helpful. So I'll throw it to the governing body members for any questions, comments for Greg.
So this is Anita. I just have a kind of a comment and question. So in regard to pushing out the extended day ahead, that's something that clearly EMI stakeholders are interested in, and I am a little bit concerned about. And I realize you guys have a huge workload, and you do a lot of really great stuff, Greg. So this is not certainly any kind of a punitive comment towards the work that you guys do. But I have a bit of a concern that particular issue being pushed out when there's pent-up demand for it, that it can cause folks to lose confidence in our ability to deliver that. And I mean, not necessarily rightfully so, but that definitely occurs to me.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I can understand that concern. One of the things I'd point out on here is a few of the issues in particular that we're addressing through that summer 2021 readiness initiative are issues that need to be worked out for the EDAM to be successful as well. For example, the export and load priorities. After the events that we saw last summer, that was clearly of concern to many of the EIM entities as to how we needed to make sure that we had very clear rules for that. So I think being able to address that issue as well as some enhancements to the EIM resource sufficiency test will all help to be somewhat foundational to our being able to advance the EDAM design going forward. So, even though we are, taking a bit of a hiatus on that directly addressing the EDAM initiative, I think we will still be, moving forward from a policy standpoint by resolving some of these issues that will help us once we re-engage in that EDAM effort, likely in March.
That's a really good point, and I hope that as you're working through these issues and you guys hear feedback around the concerns about the delay, that becomes a part of the narrative, because I think that's a really great way to kind of frame that.
Yep, thanks. We'll do that.
Member Decker, this is Elliot again. I appreciate your question. I think it's a really important question. We're using just about every opportunity we can in communicating, whether it's just direct bilateral conversations with customers or through the various conferences and forums, just to make sure everybody knows exactly what we're doing here. I think there is widespread recognition in the West, both inside California and I think in the Northwest Power Pool through its RA efforts, Desert Southwest, that all of us learned a number of key lessons coming out of this last summer, and just really digging in right now and getting the foundation as rock solid as possible is so essential. And I think that there are a number of areas where we can continue to keep some solid momentum. Obviously, we've got 5 new EIM entities coming on board this spring. The GRC is making a terrific progress. And another area, we are also continuing to have, I think, some really important dialogue with some of the key stakeholders here inside the state of California on the business case around EDAM and some of the broader structural issues. So we're trying to do everything we can to try to keep that positive momentum and deliver on those commitments as you described, which is really important, while just recognizing if we don't get the foundations right and pour the solid concrete over which we lay our markets, we're just going to continue to have problems. So that really has to be our number one priority for all of us in the reliability patch, and we're just going to keep our heads down. And I appreciate your recognition of all the work and the good staff work that these guys are doing. So thanks for the understanding and the encouragement, and also the alert.
Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. That helps. Any other governing body questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair Prescott, if I could, this is Val.
Go ahead.
Given the conversation that just occurred and the somewhat foundational nature of some of these fixes that we've been putting in place for summer 2021, we will have a meeting in early March where we will be asked to approve specific fixes. I'm wondering how there's like no real wiggle room here. I mean, you have to go to FERC by April if you want to begin implementation in June. So I'm a little concerned about the short time frame that we're dealing with, and I'm sort of looking to the extent I can to CAISO for some assurances that what we're going to be asked to review and approve and or recommend approval won't be hit with a lot of controversy out in the marketplace.
Well, that will definitely be our objective, is to try and get as much stakeholder support for these enhancements as possible. As we work through each issue, we'll make an assessment as to how much support we have, whether we had sufficient stakeholdering of the issues or not. We are, given the fact that we are in a very compressed timeline to get these enhancements in place by next summer, one of the options that we have is, if there are some certainly, contentious items that remain once we get to the decisional time in March, that we could propose that these be temporary provisions just to try and get us through next summer. A lot of times that can alleviate some of the concerns as if we're not making them permanent. But again, I think we'll have to make that, assessment on an issue-by-issue basis as we go through and get to March. But that's one way that we can help to address some of these issues, to make sure that we're at least getting these provisions in place in a timely manner, but, knowing that, maybe some of them would benefit from more comprehensive discussions with stakeholders, and, that we can leverage that by perhaps making some of these things temporary versus permanent going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I really appreciate these updates.
You bet.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments before we let them get back to work? Obviously, they're pretty busy. Okay, Anna, Greg, thanks, you guys. Always appreciated. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're just moving on to the informational reports. Does anybody have any reason to discuss any of the reports? They're in the package. Okay, hearing nothing, then any future agenda items? Okay, hearing nothing, I guess our next move is I want to thank Mike, Adam, and Christina for their help technically putting this all together, and we're adjourned, and I would say the executive session will go about 5 minutes from start up. So we are adjourned in this meeting.